Reuben Swartz, your host and chief nerd. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, the podcast for people who love using their expertise to serve clients but maybe aren't quite so enthusiastic about the sales and marketing aspects of the business. I struggled with this for years, ironically, as a sales and marketing consultant to the Fortune 500. Over time, I realized that there was a more effective, more authentic way to get clients by helping instead of selling, teaching instead of marketing, and connecting instead of networking. My mission is to help you learn the easy way instead of the way I learned it, by sharing my stories, by bringing on awesome guests to share their stories. And of course, as a software guy, I had to go and create the CRM I wished I'd had when I was struggling with more traditional systems. It does more of what us solo consultants need, help us nail our positioning, help us get more leads and conversations off our website, get more referrals, have more conversations, automates proposals all the way through to e-signature and more, and less of the bloat that comes with traditional CRMs. If you want to check it out, you can start a free trial at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. And you can even just sign up for the free version, which helps you nail your positioning. And you can also find proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, and more. Once again, that's MIMIRAN.com. Now let's get to it. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, the podcast for people who love using their expertise to serve clients but maybe aren't quite so enthusiastic about the sales and marketing aspects of the business. I struggled with this for years, ironically, as a sales and marketing consultant to the Fortune 500. Over time, I realized that there was a more effective, more authentic way to get clients by helping instead of selling, teaching instead of marketing, and connecting instead of networking. My mission is to help you learn the easy way instead of the way I learned it, by sharing my stories, by bringing on awesome guests to share their stories. And of course, as a software guy, I had to go and create the CRM I wished I'd had when I was struggling with more traditional systems. It does more of what us solo consultants need, help us nail our positioning, help us get more leads and conversations off our website, get more referrals, have more conversations, automates proposals all the way through to e-signature and more, and less of the bloat that comes with traditional CRMs. If you want to check it out, you can start a free trial at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. And you can even just sign up for the free version, which helps you nail your positioning. And you can also find proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, and more. Once again, that's MIMIRAN.com. Now let's get to it.
Reuben Swartz here with another solo episode. Today we're going to talk about planning. And those things together, the solo episode, talking about planning, a little bit ironic because I had originally planned to have a bunch of people on and discuss how we might think about doing annual planning. And unfortunately, for various reasons, that didn't happen. So I'm here to talk about planning all by myself. I've got some K Vineyards Viognier from Washington's Yakima Valley. It's a white wine, a little different just to mix things up. Very nice. So why plan, right? If you don't have a plan, it doesn't really matter what you do, you're going to get there. They say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Most of us have some form of business planning. I did a little poll on LinkedIn earlier, and it seemed like about half the people were planning to plan, and about half the people were on their way with planning, getting close to where they needed to be. And there were a couple people who said all their planning was done. So I don't know where you fall, but by the time you listen to this, it's getting close to the end of the year, or it might even be the next year. And I try just to use that artificial block of the calendar, switching over to say, okay, let's have a plan for the next year. Now, traditionally, what I had done is gone on a little weekend retreat with some other business owners, and we would prepare, present, and review each other's plans, and then go back and revise them. And I cannot emphasize how helpful it was to have other people's eyes, mouths, brains working on my business. And also how nice it was to be able to work on someone else's business. Because sometimes there's certain things, no matter how well you try to deal with it, you're just too close to it. It's just hard for you to see the forest for the trees sometimes. I have been doing that for the past few years. It was super helpful. Last year, because of COVID, it didn't happen. This year, I'm not sure if it's going to happen. So I'm planning, if you will, for it not to happen and to go through that process by myself. Now, there are about 1 billion planning results if you go Google how to plan, etc. So I don't want to tell you there's one particular format or formula that is better than another, but few things that I want to mention that you might want to keep in mind as you're laying out your plan. First of all, it shouldn't just be a business plan. It's really about your life. What are you trying to do? Yes, the business part is important. What about your relationships? What about your spiritual growth? What about your health? A lot of people do tremendous amounts of planning around their business, and then they forget about their relationships, or they assume that's just going to happen, or they forget about actually taking care of their own bodies, not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, not fueling your body the right way. Please take care of yourself. You need that to do all the other things, to grow your business and to present your best self for your other people in the relationships. Now, when it comes to business, I guess the first question is, how was 2021? Do you have a good record of what happened, and did you meet your goals for this past year? And then where are you going? It's easy to drift. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you can drift and live a very, very good life, have a very good business. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you have to go colonize Mars or cure cancer or COVID or whatever, but probably helpful to think about where you want to go. What are you trying to do? Not just because you want to make more money or be more famous or better looking or any of those things, but because your life's going to be a lot more fulfilling to you if it's your life, right? And you're not just drifting with a current. You're not just getting batted around by ideas and ideals and aspirations that are extrinsic to you. So the foundation for this is really, well, who do you help? Who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you trying to go? What kind of people do you like working with? And I'm really focused here on my tribe, on the solo consultants, on the small professional services firms. This gets more complicated when you start doing business planning for large organizations. If you're in one of those large organizations, please feel free to listen to the rest of the episode, but you've probably got a whole bunch of resources and methodologies for doing this already. So if you've got your positioning nailed, everything else gets so much easier. And I did a whole episode on positioning. And in fact, if you go back and listen to probably 50% or more of these episodes, the guests are talking about the importance of positioning. If you don't do that, everything else is harder. It's like running through sand. Swimming upstream. Pick your metaphor. Versus when you have it dialed in, it's like walking along a nice path. It's like swimming downstream, etc., etc. Everything just gets so much easier. And I don't want to recap the whole positioning episode, but the big problem people have is they want to serve too many people. They want to target everyone that they could possibly serve instead of the people that they can serve the absolute best. What's your highest calling? Who are those people that really engage you? Who are those people who are eager to pay you? Right? Versus you can always take work from outside that target market and do great work. But if you had your choice, why not aim? Why not try to go after the clients that are going to be the best for you? Don't just drift. Real quick recap, my super cheesy marketing mnemonic, mega positioning. M is for magnetic. You've got to be polarizing. You cannot attract without repelling. If you want to attract some people really strongly, you have to repel other people equally strongly. And people don't like this. It's actually the best thing. You want to repel. Those are both benefits because you want people who don't fit with you to go somewhere else so they don't waste their time and they don't waste your time. And at the same time that's happening, you can then actually attract the people who are the right fit. E is for easy. The whole point of this is to make it easier. People always get frustrated going from what they perceive as a larger market to a smaller market. I'm convinced this is wired into us from an evolutionary standpoint. That's okay. Don't fight it. Instead, think of it as easy versus hard, upstream versus downstream. G is for gorilla. We have the power to define our market such that we are the 800-pound gorilla in it, right? We don't have to take on Uber or Google or SpaceX or Nike. We can say we are the best consultant for fashion designers in the greater Austin area. Whatever it is, so that if there's someone in that market, you are the Google of that market. You are the logical, easy choice. And if you saturate that market completely, you could always make it bigger. But start with the narrowest, smallest, easiest to target market. And A is for authentic. It's got to be you, right? If you're really into a sense of humor, don't be all buttoned down and serious. If you're really serious, don't pretend you've got a great sense of humor. It's okay. Just be who you are. It's going to make things a lot more natural for you. And I know from my efforts to impersonate a salesperson at times, it's exhausting trying to be somebody else. And it's not effective. It comes across as awkward. Even if you're not trying to deceive someone, they can tell you're not being you, and it makes everything a little strange. Another way to think about this is, what are some projects or some clients that I didn't like? Let's not do any more of those. Let's be on guard against that, right? Now, of course, if you don't have this laid out, you can do this. You can even do it for free. And remember, there is a little positioning wizard in there to help you dial in exactly who you're talking to, how you're different from their typical approach, and it'll generate some sample content for you. If you're stuck on this, you can always pair it with a little wine. Sometimes it's easy to get locked too far inside our own heads. You can also ask current and past clients. Sometimes they can describe what you did for them more eloquently and more persuasively than you can describe it yourself. And if you want more on that, go back and listen to the Meg Cumby episode on getting testimonials. So let's think about that foundation, and then where do we want to go? Where do we want to build on from that foundation? What are your goals? What are your financial goals? What are your time-based goals? It could be, for example, I want to earn X amount of money. It could be, I want to take Friday afternoon off every week. It could be, I want to take a month off and go to Peru and learn Spanish. I don't know. Learn to cook Thai food. Take 2 family vacations before my kids go off to college. Whatever it might be, this is where we want to make sure we're integrating not just the business, but the other parts of your life into a coherent whole. It's one thing to say, okay, great, I made a bunch of money, but I didn't actually get to go to Peru. I've been putting that off for a decade. This really stinks. Or vice versa. I traveled and then I came back and I forgot to do my business development and now I don't have the money. That's also bad. Think about what's important so you're not just drifting. And then we can think about, well, what does it take to get there? And then natural inclination. Here's a mistake that I've made with planning a lot of times. To say, okay, so I need to do these other things. I need to grow and meet these new higher targets. So I need to do more stuff or more iterations of the stuff I'm doing. And so you basically make your to-do list longer. And the problem is you have 24 hours in the day. So the to-do list cannot just keep getting longer. Just can't. There's finite time. You can't have an infinite to-do list. So you want to eliminate, automate, delegate what you can. And the most important word there is eliminate. Eliminate the stuff that you don't need to do anymore, or it's just not serving you well. Or maybe it's serving you okay, but it's taking away from doing something that's more important. So one thing that I see a lot of consultants doing here, and I know I was guilty of it as well, is you have way too many conversations with people who just want to pick your brain. In fact, that's where the whole genesis of this podcast came from. Like I drove across town, spent half an hour in traffic, sat down with someone for an hour, drove half an hour back, 2 hours out of my day, and I felt like I really helped somebody, but I wasn't actually driving my business forward, and I wasn't doing anything for them that I couldn't do through another medium like a podcast or a blog post. So this doesn't mean that we're going to turn our backs necessarily on people who could benefit from our help but maybe can't afford to pay us or not pay us the rates that we really want to make. We have other ways of helping them, right? We can write a book, we can do a blog, we can do a podcast, we can have a YouTube channel, we can have white papers and lead magnets and so on. But we're not obligated to invest our time with people who are distracting us from where we really want to go. That's just one example, but there's lots of these things that we're like, oh, I'd love to do that. And then you end up filling up your calendar with stuff that doesn't really get you where you need to go. And then the big chunks of time that you need to really work on your business, somehow they disappear and you don't get to make that forward progress. So really important that you're in the right room with the right people based on where you're trying to go, based on your positioning. And I like to think of this as zero-based budgeting, but for tasks. So in some organizations, you have budgets that basically roll over year to year, or they make a percentage change. And other organizations do zero-based budgeting. And the idea there is all the budgets reset to zero every year or every whatever the period is. And you have to re-justify why you want to spend this money. Think of it the same way for tasks, right? Instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and I'm going to add X, Y, and Z. Think, I'm going to clear my plate, and I'm going to build back in, starting with the most important stuff. You guys have probably heard the parable of the professor who has a jar and a bunch of rocks in front of the class, and rocks of different sizes, and sand. And it really depends what order you put the rocks in, whether you can fit them in. So if you in the little rocks and work your way up, by the time you get to the big rocks, there's no room anymore. If you start with the big rocks and you fit the, you're not going to fit everything in either, but the stuff that's left over is the sand. It's not the big rocks. So if you think of your health, your relationships, your spiritual growth, your really important business goals as some of the big rocks, make sure those get in there first, and then you can build some of the nice to have stuff in as well if time permits, instead of letting people actually put the sand onto your calendar. So speaking of all this, we want to think about when we're adding our task back in, should this task be here, right? Does this help me get to one of my big goals? And if so, should I be doing it? Do I have to do this, or could I eliminate it? Could I delegate it to somebody else? Could I automate it? Right? Doesn't necessarily mean just because something has to happen that I have to spend an hour doing it. It's easier than ever these days to get a VA. There is more and more software tools and apps and whatnot available. So you can get more done in less time. And I think sometimes we end up on this quote unquote productivity treadmill where we feel like we're really busy, but we're not achieving stuff. That's because we're not necessarily working on the big rocks. We're shoveling sand. So next step, speaking of putting sand on the calendar, we've got to put the tasks on the calendar. And this is where planning usually goes awry. It's like, okay, I have to do all these things. I need to have, I've done the math, and I need to have 500 conversations and write X number of proposals and do Y number of actual projects at Z rates and so on, and then I'm all set. Well, where does that all fit in? Turns out it doesn't, because I signed up for 3 networking meetings and end up, my kid got sick and blah, 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 blah. And before you know it, you don't have time to do all that stuff. So put the key tasks on the calendar. Block out that time first. Put the big rocks in, and then you can schedule the sand around the big rocks. And if you need to, you can even move a big rock to put some sand in or put some small rocks in. That's okay. But don't sit there and assume that you're going to fit the big rocks in after everything else gets scheduled. I know I've done it, and it doesn't work very well, and you end up very frustrated. So lock down that time in the calendar. Of course, again, if you're using Mimrin, make sure you're locking down your prospecting time and your time to talk to your partners and so on. But also for whatever your big rock projects are, put some time in there. I know this past year has been very strange on people's schedules, and it's been hard to establish a routine. The other thing I would say here is when you do put this stuff in the calendar, don't book everything as if the calendar is going to flow precisely to the minute like a Tokyo train system. It's not going to work that way. Life is going to happen. Build some slack into it. And I remember reading about this in productivity books when I was in my 20s. I was like, that's for wimps, right? You got to book why would you waste a minute? And then of course life happens. Things get off schedule. People get frustrated. You're late to things. You're stressed. You're hard. You don't do your best work. Build some slack time into the calendar and build it around those big rocks. Because what you want to do is when you get to the end of the day, the end of the week, did you do the most important thing that you set out to do for that day, that week, that month, that quarter, etc.? Otherwise, you end up with too much sand and not enough progress on the big rocks. So make sure you don't assume that all the weeks are going to go perfectly. I try to have kind of a weekly routine, and I was doing pretty well with this up until COVID hit, and then every week has just been different, and it's starting to get back to quasi-normal as much as it can be normal with 2 kids and a dog and a wife with a busy schedule and so on and so forth, other things happening in life. So got to build in some resiliency into your planning with your calendar. One thing to think about is how much time are you actually devoting to your key tasks? I don't know how many times I hear from people that the number one thing they're facing is lead generation. That's the big thing they want to work on. If they could just fix that, everything would be easy because they're great at serving their clients, right? Those are about the people I like to work with. They don't really have big problems delivering. It's more just the business development. And I'm like, okay, how much time did you spend doing business development last week? Well, I sent out a newsletter and I posted on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I'm like, okay, so that's what, like 30 minutes, half an hour, or an hour if you wasted a bunch of time on LinkedIn? This is the number one thing that's holding back your business, and you're telling me you spent an hour on it, right? If that's really the number one thing that's holding back your business, how many hours should you be spending? Now, granted, if something else would probably become the number one problem, right? You wouldn't be delivering for your clients. So you can't spend all of it on your number one thing. I mean, and maybe in some cases you can, right? You might have to take a week or 2 or 3. If you've got no client work, you should spend all your time on business development, right? It's not that rocket sciencey. But if you're not devoting at least 4, 5, 8 hours a week to business development, and you're saying that's your number one problem, go there and figure out where you can take out some smaller rocks and put that big business development rock in. A lot of people are really relying on referrals, and there's nothing wrong with referrals. I'm a big fan of referrals. Kept me afloat when I was consulting, which is a whole other story about why I wasn't being more proactive on doing other stuff. But I wasn't even being proactive enough about referrals. So if that's where you're at, make sure you're blocking off a lot of time to nurture the relationships with those referral partners. Again, not rocket science, but if you put it in the calendar and you actually do it, first of all, you're going to get more referrals. Secondly, you're going to have better relationships, even with the people who don't give you referrals. Maybe you don't even give them referrals, but you just enjoy talking to each other. You enjoy each other's company. Your life's going to be better. Now, one thing to think about is how many conversations do I need to have with people? And here I am assuming that you're in a consultative business where you need to have conversations with prospects to get them to become clients, right? There's a limit to how many people you can deal with. And so it's great if you've got a 10,000 person mailing list or 50,000 person mailing list, but you can't talk to 50,000 people. So you need some way to sort of distill out the people that you are most eager to talk to or most eager to talk to you, and you need to devote time to having conversations with them. And I would really suggest, if you can't do this every day, at least do it 2 or 3 days a week for blocks of at least an hour. I'm an introvert. It took me a long time to get to this point where I actually look forward to talking to people, and it is so much fun. And the nice thing is, once you sort of make a habit of it, it doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like I'm making sales calls, because I'm not. I'm just having conversations with people about subjects that we both are passionate about. So it's really fun. It's really interesting. And if I do a good job with my foundation, with my positioning, with my marketing, enough of those conversations are going to lead to business that good things happen. And sometimes they don't lead to business. You're not going to bat 1,000. That's okay. But if there's sometimes where I'm like, gosh, I seem to be having a lot of conversations with people who are just not the right fit, I can feed that back into my positioning to make sure that those people get the help they need from the place they need it and don't take up my time. If you're interested, you can, again, do this for free in Mimrin. There is a pipeline planner tool. It's under reports, which is probably not the best place to put it, but because it's more of a worksheet really, but it's basically got 2 columns. You've got your referrals column and your online business column. And it goes from, for the referrals, how many conversations do you have with partners? How many of them, what percentage of those lead to referrals? So that gives you how many referral leads do you get? How many of those referrals lead to conversations? And then what percentage of those go to proposal? What's your win rate? What's your average revenue on that? And it's going to show you how many clients and how much revenue you get based on those assumptions. Same thing with the online. How many visitors? What's the conversion percentage to a lead? Conversion percentage to conversation, to proposal, etc. And you can kind of look at those. Now, of course, in real life, there's going to be some overlap between those 2 categories, but you can think of them as just being separate channels. If you're all referrals today, start with the referrals piece and really make that not automated, but habitual. So you're working on it, and it's like you can't force a referral to come out of thin air, but you can do a lot to make referrals more likely, as opposed to like, oh gosh, I hope a referral comes in this month. And if you want more on that, check out the Stacey Brown Randall episode on getting referrals without asking. And then you can think about, how do you tie your online stuff to that? If you've got helpful lead magnets, you can start using them with your existing prospects. Don't even think about, gosh, I've got to drive all this traffic and do social media and whatever other complicated stuff if you're not doing that yet. Just think of those lead magnets as a way to augment how you're interacting with the folks that are coming through your referral channel and giving you sort of a window into who cares about what and how deeply, and giving you a way to have conversations with them. And again, you can kind of see, well, here's how many conversations I need to have. And it'll even show you how many I need to have each week to make these numbers work. And so you can kind of play with it, and 78 conversations a week, something's wrong. Probably your conversion percentage is too low and your prices are way too low would be my first guess, but really depends. But the thing that I think is most interesting about this is you usually don't need to have that many conversations per week, but you got to do it regularly. And the trap that we fall into, I know, that feast or famine roller coaster trap, is you get real busy and business development just kind of dries up. And it's worse than, it's not just like it pauses and then it can resume right away. It actually dries up and like the water sinks below the ground, and you got to start drilling it up when you get back into business development mode, right? It's like when you stop working out for a week, it's not like you just pause and don't get better. You don't get more fit. Your fitness decreases, and you got to work back up to where you were before just to break even. So consistency is hugely important there. Now, I know there's a lot more to business planning than just the business development piece. I'm operating on the assumption here on this Sales for Nerds podcast that a lot of the other stuff you've got locked down, and that business development, the sales and marketing piece, the networking piece, that's where you maybe are not feeling so comfortable with your planning. Now, we talked about figuring out exactly where you're going, what tasks you need to get there, how to schedule time to get there, how to have conversations and make sure that it all fits into your calendar and so on. The thing that I would suggest doing, and this kind of ties back to what I have been doing, is review this plan with other people. Get together with 2, 3, 4 other peers and review each other's plans. They're going to help you not only get a different perspective from another person's brain focusing on the problem, but having multiple other brains all interacting with each other and being able to build on observations. And probably the biggest thing is letting you see where, gosh, you could probably cut out entire realms of activity and just simplify. I know so many times I've been like, oh gosh, I've got to do this and that and 10 of these and they're like, why don't you just not do any of that if this is the thing that's working? I'm like, oh, yeah, that's really obvious now that you mention it, and I've been staring at this plan for weeks and it didn't occur to me. I like to think I'm fairly clever, but apparently not. Or apparently there's just some things you can't see when you're too close to them. So really behooves you to get together with people, and if for some reason you don't feel like you have that peer group, send me an email at hello@salesfornerds.io, and I'll hook you up with other people and you guys can review each other's plans. Now, of course, it's important to actually carve out some time and space to do this planning. We used to go off for a weekend. We would wake up, would go skiing or snowboarding during the day, and then all night was devoted to reviewing plans. But the real work, of course, was in the preparation of the plans ahead of time. And it's going to depend. This is where things get really wishy-washy, and it's hard to be cookie cutter about how much time you need. Some people are all locked and loaded on their positioning. They've got a really good handle on things, and they're basically turning knobs, right? So they might be able to do all their planning in a couple of hours. There's other people who really need to spend some time figuring out who the heck their ideal client is. What do they do for their client that's different? Now, this could take 20 minutes. This could take 2 hours. It could take 2 weeks, depending on how many other people they have to talk to, how stuck they get. Again, if you get stuck, apply some wine, whatever you need. And take the time to get that foundation right. I know I've been guilty of this too. You're just in such a rush to get to like doing stuff, and it feels so wishy-washy to work on the positioning that you kind of skip over it. And then before you know it, everything seems really hard. And that means you're swimming upstream. You're not having fun. It's not going to be as effective. So it's a little bit of Zen, but go slow to go fast. Measure twice, cut once, whatever your phrase is, right? Let's figure out who we're really trying to help if you need to. So make sure you block off this time on the calendar. This is one of those big rocks, right? And it's going to be painful to say, gosh, maybe I have to take a day, or I have to take 3 afternoons in a week and work on this when I'm not doing other things that are also pressing and urgent and important and so on. But you got to have time, preferably to go away, turn off your cell phones, be in a different place. It's hard now with travel restrictions and so on. Things are a little bit up in the air, but make the time to do it. You'll be happy you did, because then when you wake up in the morning, you're really clear on what you're trying to do, and it's easy to say no to some of those obligations, right? Remember the thing, like, we want to have the not to-do list. We want to eliminate some things. We want to know what are some of those things in that category that if they come up, I can politely decline. Or if I just get intrigued by a shiny object, I can say, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to follow that for later when I have more time. I'm not going to go spend 3 hours investigating whatever it is. Now for me, my planning process, not even complete. But the big thing that I'm aiming for next year is 100 customer testimonials. I've got a bunch now, and I meant to look up before this episode how many I have, but I was like, you know what? I don't know. And it would be cheating for me to like look up right before and say, oh, I know. I don't. I have a bunch. And I've actually been told I have more than I need, right? Like I have like 6 or 8 or 10 or something like that. I usually use like 3 for a SaaS product. So I've actually been told this is a dumb goal by some people, but here's why I'm doing it. It's more than I need for marketing, but it does a few things. One, it forces me to focus on customer success. That's actually what I'm here for, right? Like if I'm going to get 100 people.
Thanks for listening. Did something in this episode or a past episode help you out? I'd love to hear about it. Send comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes to hello@salesfornerds.io. And of course, iTunes reviews are super helpful for getting the word out. So if you've got a few moments to put one of those up, I'd really appreciate it. If you've got a friend who'd benefit from one of these episodes, send a link. If you've got a friend who wouldn't benefit from one of the episodes, but you just haven't talked to in a while, this is a great excuse to pick up the phone and give them a call. Of course, if you're looking for a whole new take on CRM for solo consultants, along with proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, free positioning tools, and more, check it out at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time.